Today we'll be taking a look at one of the newer options for the Astra Militarum, and when I say new, I mean it's a new relic from the Great Crusade that they've found, so maybe not that new. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy and tactics focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. Today we'll be focusing on the Carnodon Imperial Militia Battle Tank, a fairly recent Forge World release that appears to be a light mainline battle tank. It seems to be fairly similar to a Predator tank, but for the Astra Militarum. In this video we'll take a look at its 40k rules, any obvious combos or synergies on the table, and how I would run them in a game of 40k myself. In the background, the Carnodon medium battle tank saw its peak during the Great Crusade. It was adapted from the sturdy Aurochs pattern tank chassis. It's a very flexible and versatile tank design that can mount a turret and spawn some weapons, and was typically deployed to more garrison sort of worlds rather than the front line of the Great Crusade. In the 41st millennium, the Priesthood of Mars have now conveniently reinstated the STC for use on several Imperial Forge worlds, so once again this ancient tank is seeing the light of battle once more to combat the forces of chaos spilling out from the Great Rift. So let's see what its datasheet can do on the table. So in game, the Carnodon is a heavy support choice for Codex Astra Militarum. In its cheapest formulation, it will cost you 90 points when it's armed with a twin multi-laser and 2 multi-laser sponsons. Its profile is pretty similar to that of a Chimera. It has movement 12, weapon skill 6 up, ballistic skill 4 up, strength 6, toughness 7, 10 wounds, 3 attacks, leadership 7 and a 3 up save. So pretty much your standard guard vehicle profile. It can trade out its multi-lasers for a whole variety of different options, and I honestly think that you should because multi-lasers are just a bit overcosted at the moment. For the turret you can replace the twin multi-laser with a volkite culverin for an additional 4 points, a twin las cannon for an additional 20 points, or a twin autocannon again for an additional 4 points. We're all well aware what autocannons and las cannons do, but that volkite culverin is a 45-inch range heavy 4 weapon with strength 6, AP -1 and damage 2. But each time you make a wound roll of 6+ for this weapon, the target suffers D3 mortal wounds in addition to any other damage. This is a very powerful rule, and basically when you compare it to the autocannon, at virtually all hard targets, even the ones that the autocannon should be a bit better at, the toughness 6 and toughness 7 vehicles, this means that the Carnodon's volkite culverin wins out. So basically the choice of the turret weapon in the most optimised sense is between the volkite culverin and the twin las cannon, depending on whether you want to be a bit better versus medium 2 wound infantry and very light vehicles, or you want to spend the extra few points to make it a true anti-tank beast. It also can have the option of changing out its sponson weapons. It has 2 multi-lasers that you can swap out for either 2 of either heavy bolters, heavy flamers, volkite calivers, autocannons or las cannons. The volkite calivers are 30-inch heavy 2 weapons with strength 6, AP -1 and damage 2, and if you make a wound roll of 6 they just inflict 1 extra mortal wound on the target. Those multi-lasers just cost 10 points, so upgrading to heavy bolters costs an additional 6. I would typically do this as a base though, just because that extra pip of AP is really valuable these days, particularly with Space Marines running around all over the place. The next cheapest are the twin autocannons. They'll cost you an additional 10 points over the multi-lasers. Then the volkite calivers, which are 4 points over the autocannons. And honestly, I think that the two choices are quite balanced on the sponson weapons, because now the autocannons cost less, and the volkite calivers have shorter range and only do 1 additional mortal wounds. This means that in general the autocannons are going to outperform point for point against toughness 6 and toughness 7 targets, but the volkite calivers will be slightly better against toughness 5 and toughness 8, presuming they're in range of course. So I think these two options are pretty well balanced for the sponsons. I'm really not the biggest fan of heavy flamers on tanks, as it means that you have to get them very close to the enemy for them to be effective, and risk them being locked up, plus heavy flamers are really quite expensive options in themselves, so I wouldn't take these. Finally, the las cannons are really quite cheap at the moment, as per chapter approved going down to 15 points each, so upgrading to be a heavy anti-tank platform has never been better. All this adds up so that a quad las cannon Carnodon will cost you 130 points overall. One with all of the volkite weapons will cost you 108 points, and one with all the autocannons will cost you 104. So a cheap, reasonably durable, reasonably effective gun platform there. It doesn't have any additional special rules, just the normal explode special rule, which it explodes on a 6. So let's see what ways we can use to buff it and get more out of it. First of all, of course, we have regiment choice. Cadian is going to be a very strong pick for a gunline tank that's main benefit is shooting. Rerolling ones when stationary is great, overlapping fields of fire is amazing, and the Relic of Lost Cadia certainly doesn't hurt too in a pinch. Katachan don't really benefit this tank all that much. The only real advantage is for the heavy flamers, which of course I don't think are the best choice for this guy. Talon is a really strong pick for the Carnodons, as these are tanks that are really going to want to be moving and shooting where possible, due to that really long movement range, but in any other regiment this just completely destroys their firepower efficiency. With Talon you can have these guys zipping around 12 inches every single turn, unloading their heavy weapons to full effect, and hopefully outmanoeuvring their other tank counterparts. Vostroin will certainly help out any of the medium-range weapons, particularly things like the heavy bolter and those volkite calivers, or could even potentially help out the long-range lascannons, allowing you to deploy just outside of 48 inches of enemy heavy hitters, while still being able to shoot them. Armageddon can also help you ignore some AP-1. Valhallan can help you a bit, if you do get to the point where your tank's degrading but not destroyed, and Mordian Iron Guard can up your overwatch, should you get in the unfortunate situation of this tank being charged. In terms of character support, any sources of reroll ones can be handy. This is usually Yarrick or Harker if you're playing Katachan. I wouldn't just choose Yarrick to buff these tanks alone, as they're quite small units that are quite cheap, but if he's here for buffing something else, then you may as well throw them in his aura if you can manage it. Tech Priest can pile some extra wounds back on this thing. It could be handy to have one around if you're using a lot of armour. Again though, this one isn't always going to be the most efficient target for Tech Priest repairs, as the tanks are quite cheap from a points per wound perspective. Finally, you can use Astropaths and Primaris Psychers to make them -1 to hit and +1 to their save with Night Shroud and Psychic Barrier. Certainly good if you only have Carnodons and no other big heavy hitters, but if you are using things like Tank Commanders or Leman Russes, you certainly might want to think about using those buffs on them rather than these, as these are generally cheaper. In terms of guard stratagems, the usual tank related ones apply. Crush them could be useful if you're just being locked up by a single enemy infantry model and you want to clear it to be able to shoot next turn. Jury rigging could pile an extra wound back onto him, and it's best used if you are just at 5 wounds left and you want to be hitting on 4s again. Defensive gunners could get them a little bit of overwatch if they're being charged by something where the overwatch is going to matter, and Vengeance for Cadia is a solid option whenever you're fighting some chaos, though again it might be better off to use it on a bigger, heavier hitting tank. So how would I use Carnodons in-game? I've already said that I prefer the lascannons or the volkite for the turret, depending on exactly what you want to target, and for the sponsons I'd be quite happy to be flexible depending on what sort of firepower I wanted. Literally all of the choices aren't too bad. The only ones that I don't personally like are the heavy flamers, as it means that you'd have to rush this tank up towards the enemy to get any value out of them. The rest are quite balanced, all the way from very cheap multi-lasers through the middle anti-light vehicle, volkite and autocannons, to the high-strength lascannons, which would of course synergise quite well if you are using a lascannon turret. I think Cadian and Talon are by far the strongest choices for regiment choice, giving a decent buff to damage output and a decent buff to manoeuvrability respectively. With an Astra Militarum vehicle army, we'd be wanting to set up our tanks well screened behind infantry. If we're going second, we could think about hiding them out of line of sight, or putting them in cover, or using prepared positions to get an additional save. And from there you're going to be just wanting to play a game of point and delete at the scariest enemy threats as they manifest themselves. I think that this thing does have a bit of a weakness compared with the Leman Russ if you're not running Talon, in that its firepower damage output will drop massively every time you move it, compared with the Russ's grindy advance rule, which at least lets it shuffle around 5 inches per turn, which is actually quite a big deal. So if you aren't playing as Talon, then positioning on the first turn is going to be absolutely key to make sure it has decent line of sight all game, but also in an area where it's going to be protected. So how does this thing compare to the other guard armour options in the Codex, particularly to the Leman Russ tank? Their relative durability does depend a little bit on how you equip them, but as a general rule of thumb, these things are going to be more durable against Strength 9 weapons or Strength 6 weapons, but less durable than their Leman Russ counterparts against Strength 7 and 8, which are particularly good at taking out Toughness 7 targets compared with Toughness 8. They will be of course a lot more durable than Tank Commanders, at least point for point, due to the Tank Commander's high price tag. In terms of damage output, these Carnodons will be roughly equivalent in engaging light vehicles in terms of damage output compared with your standard Leman Russ battle tank. The two have very similar decently weighted damage output, when you go with an anti-light vehicle option such as the volkite culverin and 2 autocannons, so they could certainly be a reasonable alternative. I would say though, unless you're playing as Talon, the regular main Russ with a battle cannon and heavy bolter is likely to outcompete these most of the time, just because they get that 5-inch movement per turn. So if you're comparing these guys to the Russes, they both have very similar damage output and durability, but the Russes get a 5-inch move per turn as well, putting them slightly ahead in my book. The lascannon variant is certainly very interesting though too. There aren't actually that many Imperial Guard tanks that pack a whole ton of lascannons and can happily sit at the back of your deployment zone, engaging enemy armour from long range. Their main Forge World counterpart for this is the Leman Russ Annihilator, which can have 4 lascannon shots from the turret and also 1 from the hull. And I think that the two are fairly well balanced in terms of points between durability and damage output again. If the range isn't such a big issue, then naturally Leman Russ Demolishers will heavily outcompete them. But having 48-inch range is really a decent advantage and shouldn't be underestimated. So overall, I do really like the Carnodon. They're fun little tanks, and they do compete decently with Leman Russes in the heavy support slot, even after the points drop for the Russ in the recent chapter approved. I do feel that in the most competitive Imperial Guard lists, these guys might struggle to break through a little bit, just because of the multiple overlapping synergies that we can get with Leman Russes that just aren't available to these guys. But unless you're looking to absolutely hyper-optimize everything, there's absolutely nothing wrong with running these guys in an Imperial Guard army, and they most certainly have niches where they outperform a lot of our other units. So let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. It's quite nice to see another pattern of armour that the Imperial Guard can deploy, even if these things will cost you £71 per tank. Thanks very much to James C. Faulkner for suggesting the Carnodon video and supporting me on Patreon. It is much appreciated. It's certainly been a fun guard tank to look into, so thanks for the video suggestion. We'll be continuing with our guard tactics series tomorrow with a look at our heavy weapons teams, and we might have some Leman Russ turret comparisons later in the week, so feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see that. Thanks very much for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys in the next video.